Okay. It looks like we have everybody here. There we go. We got all of our panelists. We have our moderator. Everybody, I'd like to kick it off by introducing myself and introducing this event. I'm Justin Bork. I'm one of the organizers and one of the volunteers here at Startup Boston Week. I want to kick things off with a few housekeeping items. So first off, a big thank you to our panelists, to our moderator, Emily Barden, who are here on this session. If you look up at your agenda section, you will see a few things that I want to draw your attention to. There's a big list of all the events that are going on. So if you meant to go to a different event, or if you want to kind of float back and forth between different events, it's perfectly fine. You'll see everything that's going on at the exact same time under the agenda. You'll also see a lot of the events that are upcoming. So if you're planning to attend some of the afternoon sessions, that's going to be a great resource for you. We encourage questions. That is a big part of Startup Boston, and that is why we are here. So if you have any questions, on the top right, you'll see Q&A. That is where you can enter your questions. It makes it really easy for our panelists and moderators to see those questions so that they can be addressed. That's where we recommend you put them. The other thing that I want to mention is that Startup Boston is a labor of love. It's an all-volunteer organization. We are also very fortunate to have sponsors that support us and help us make this possible. So I'd like to give a big shout out and a thank you to TalentWorks, which is helping to make this event possible, not only through their sponsorship, but also their expertise when it comes to workforce planning. So that's a big important thing. And if you want to learn more about TalentWorks, you can check out the doc section on the top right that has some information. And then if you check the partners section on the top, there's a tab that has a list of all of our sponsors. You can learn more about TalentWorks. Very last thing, I promise this is the last thing. We are doing a contest right now. So as we go through the session, if you hear any quotes that you really, really like, post them on social media with the hashtag SBW2021. Startup Boston Week, SBW2021. If you do that, you'll be entered to win one of 5 $100 gift cards to a local Black-owned Boston business. So really, really cool things that we have going on. With that, I'll pass it along to our moderator, Emily Barden. Take it away, Emily.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Justin. Hi, everyone. I'm Emily Barden. I'm a people ops journalist at Optimus Ride, which is a Boston-based autonomous vehicle tech startup. We have successfully onboarded over 100 employees in just 3 quarters. So I'm thrilled to be with a fabulous panel to learn and certainly be inspired by. So I'd love to start over with some panel introductions so we can discuss how we scale our orgs from 10 to 100. Jody, would you like to kick it off?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Jody Roby. I am the SVP and a shareholder for TalentWorks. We are a talent attraction firm, a global firm. I run North America out of Boston or sunny Framingham right now. And we've really been excited to be part of this week. We tend to work with a lot of organizations that are just getting to that exciting time now that we're past COVID of scaling and needing to scale quickly. So we have employer brand, digital, creative specialists, outsourced recruiting specialists, insight specialists, and teams to just help you as far as you need to. So really happy to be here.
Thanks, Mike.
Hi, everybody. I'm Mike Brown. I'm the head of people at Meter. We are a pseudo stealth mode startup focused on inspection technology. I'll leave it at that. I joined back in January when we were 16 people, and we're 51 now. And so we've gone through some similar growth to what this panel is all about.
And Danny?
Hi, everyone. I'm Danny Kara-Georges. I'm the head of talent for Reify Health. We create cloud-based software that helps support the clinical trial ecosystem. The hope here is that we can help life-saving medications get to patients faster. I joined back in October. We were about 70 people. We're closing in, I think, on 250 now and accelerating. So really, really crazy growth. So super excited to be a part of this discussion.
Great. This is really exciting and an incredible panel. So our first question actually is going to head over to our audience. Since this is all about hypergrowth mode, we'd love to hear how many folks our audience is looking to onboard and hire, say, in the next 6 to 9 months. So we'll give it a minute for that poll to open up. I hope
Good
that
night.
100 to 200 is a caffeine drinker. Awesome. So we have a little bit of a mixed bag, which is exciting, but I always love a dramatic entrance. So I'd love to kind of focus on this 50 and up start. So you have to hire over 50 people in the next 6 to 9 months. Where do you even start? Mike, do you want to kick it off?
Sure. Well, I think the first thing I've done, and so I've done this a few different times, and whether it's adding 50 people, 100 people, or tripling a 1,000-person company, I always freak out. That's the first thing I always do, and that's why I have no hair. But in all seriousness, usually where I start is I tend to think, ask a lot of questions. I try to validate the plan, try to determine, is it possible? Why are we hiring these people? What's the timeline? And then I start to pull on data and try to do as much what I call capacity modeling, using benchmark data, or if we have any sort of like historic hiring data. It's good to determine if you have the right people on the bus in order to achieve the plan. I also take it a step further. I tend to look at the manager and interview squad as well, because I want to determine if we actually have enough managers and enough time in the day to be able to complete the plan without necessarily overburdening the team and pulling away from productivity. So there's many other things that you can do to start, but those are just a couple of things that I do.
Danny, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think a lot of what Mike said is really a similar approach I take. I think freaking out is usually the first step, and then sort of figuring out, all right, what do we do next? I think from my perspective, trying to understand what the best strategy is, right? Are we going to hire top down? We're going to go get a manager or a director and then hire their team, which I'm usually supportive of. I think I think it removes friction if you're hiring your own team, right, and building your own team, but not always the case. I think another part is building a very quantifiable sort of interview process, right? That if somebody does well in the interview process, they're going to do well in the interview, and you're asking the right questions, you've got the right people involved. What that does is help with interviewer efficiency, right? We've got a small team. We don't want them to be all overloaded. We're going to set limits around how many interviews, say, per week each person can do. But of those interviews, we want to make sure we're being efficient with that time. And so finding something that's extremely quantifiable, something that's efficient, and then we can evaluate that over time. If somebody does really well in the interview process and they do really well in the first 90 days, we're doing a great job. If they're not, maybe we need to reevaluate, making sure we're handling things the right way and making sure that the interview process is a good indicator of future success. That way, we're not having to do it over and over again.
Jody, anything?
A couple things. I get to see this from a different lens because we're usually brought in as an outsource partner. So I agree with everything Danny and Mike said. I think having some consistency, I think that's something that's always interesting is, as you have to scale, you need to have a couple of ground rules to say, okay, one manager may want eight different interviews and a test, and someone else says just hire me anybody quickly. So making sure you know that, and most importantly, like what's in it for the candidate. I think we can be very, very focused on what we think we need, but right up front, what is that authentic proposition from an employer brand of saying, this is what we do mission-wise, this is what the experience is like. It doesn't need to be overly fancy. It just needs to be true so that you're bringing in the right people that feel like they're going to fit the culture, because the job description, a data scientist is a data scientist until you really understand how that fits into that organization.
Right. So when you're hiring this much, you're recruiting a lot, and your teams are dedicating a significant amount of time to tech screens, to final round interviews. So Danny, I guess to your point of you don't want your teams overloaded and you want to be efficient, what programs and initiative need to be in place to make sure that your employees are adequately prepared to evaluate candidates?
Yeah, I think there's certainly interview training, right? One of the things that I forgot to mention in my last piece was Mike sort of talked about capacity, right? Like, what can we actually hire with the people we have? Do we need to hire more? Do we need to go to external resources? And TalentWorks is something that we're using now for that exact reason. We know we need to hire, let's say, 50 people today. But maybe we don't need to hire past 50. Do we need to hire more recruiters, or do we not? Or should we sort of do more something like an RPO sort of deal? I think this is all really important. But I think interview training is really critical, right? Having very defined focuses for each interviewer, right? So they know what they're going in and evaluating. What I like to avoid is sort of the I think and I feels, right? I think this person can do the job. I feel like maybe they could, right? To the point where when we leave an interview or we leave a debrief, we know that this person has the skills and experience to do an amazing job. Like that's the objective always. And it's never 100%, but as close as we can get to 100% helps us, be very conservative with our resources.
Mm-hmm. Mike, does your team do anything different over at Meter?
We provide interview training. We focus a lot on how we do it at, Meter, for instance, and, as it pertains to, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and unconscious bias training and conscious inclusion. We also spend a lot of time aligning on core values so that, the team can really determine a culture add versus, and we can also kind of flush out that old culture fit or, not culture fit. I think another thing that's really important is making sure that you have a hiring vision statement. And, whether it's, the talent leader or the CEO that writes it, somebody that kind of points to a North Star on, what is the right person or the ideal candidate look like? And, what's that process need to look like? And, at Shift, I had a process that we called Fit First Hiring. At Toast, we had the Toast structured hiring process, and similar at Meter, we have the Meter structured hiring process. And I think those all include, a piece, from the CEO on, the North Star of how we hire. I also think there's other things that can be done in terms of interview prep kits, and depending on the complexity of the role, you may want to email the team and define people's roles and where they are, their role for what to interview for as it pertains to various competencies. I think internal communications can also be pretty helpful here, whether it's how you spotlight a role internally to your team, how the manager talks about it, the email communications, or the social media campaigns that you might push internally for internal branding or employer branding. And then lastly, I think interviewer experience matters too. And so it's, really important that your team is really prepped as they go in. It's you always hear people say that they walked into an interview and didn't know much about the candidate. So, not giving them an opportunity to say that, I think, is an ideal situation.
I'm going to add to that because I think right now it's so different what we're seeing in the market. It is highly unlikely that you're going to be getting lots of applications. So the majority of the good talent that you're going to want is probably going to be working somewhere else or passive talent. So I 100% with Mike's point is you have to prepare your hiring managers, founders, whoever it might be, to say, this person may not be 100% sold yet on joining. So it's a mindset as well. They've obviously gone through a screening process that they're interested, but there is still some selling and explaining to do. And today's candidates can just get turned off right away and say, they didn't seem, I didn't get a warm and fuzzy feeling, or I kept getting rescheduled and I don't really believe they're interested. So not to add more freaking out to the freaking out that's going on, but it is legitimate that right now, it's challenging, especially in Boston. And on top of that, you're also having this attrition trend, so that even the people that you feel are your solid team that you're building out and hiring for, they may be leaving even though they didn't know they were leaving today. So you have to really start to build those relationships internally and be flexible and communicate so that everybody's on the same page. And it's hard to do that when you're building and busy. And the people strategy sometimes is sitting back here, but that's going to help or hurt you as you grow. So
yeah, I think that's such a shift, right? It's such a candidate market now where it's not all about, is this person a fit for us? We want to make sure we're selling as much as we're evaluating, right? Because there's so many options, especially with remote culture, right? How do you stand out? How do you give an amazing candidate experience? How do you give an amazing interview process when interviews inherently are uncomfortable, right? And so how do we make that person more comfortable and enjoy their experience, that ultimately, when the dust settles, right, they're a fit for us and we're a fit for them, and it sort of goes a lot more smoothly when you take that approach, in my opinion.
Yeah, just to kind of add on that as well, I think the speed of which you can objectively measure, the candidate and get back to them, with feedback, matters a lot in this market, and it's a great way to differentiate, between other employers out there.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of internal communications and, to your point, selling pretty aggressively, who on your team should be talking to candidates late stage in the process when you need to make a hire or no hire decision? Mike?
I think it kind of depends on the intent of the interview. So, like the more complex the interview, the kind of the more complex the process might be. But I think in later rounds, you'll want to pull in people that have, kind of the higher bandwidth time, I guess. So your CEO or your department executive, and try and use some of the kind of the team and your hiring challenges up front in process, so that you can kind of limit the amount of time that you pull from those people.
Right. And speaking of time too, Jody, kind of recruiting process right now, sustain third and fourth round interviews in this market?
Quick answer is maybe third interviews, but not 6 or 7 or 8, which is the reality with a lot of, when you're looking to hire, from 20 to 50, it's a big deal, or 50 to 100. So every role is important, and it's a critical piece of the business. So there is the inclination to have everybody meet that person, but that is really hurting companies right now. Good people that are the right type of people, and they feel good and right in those first couple rounds, you might need to just make that move quicker than in past years, because we're hearing stories that even people who've accepted, they're still interviewing. The longer your process takes, and Danny and Mike are, it's not just bad behavior from a few, it's everybody. Like, why not? You're sitting in your living room. It's pretty easy to continue to do that. You're getting sought after because you're a data scientist or an AI background, or DevOps or client success, and everybody wants you. So you have to be able to really show that you're interested in this person quickly. And if it feels right, my advice is make the move quicker, because it's going to be a much more challenging conversation that if that person didn't work out, as if the right person left because we weren't quick enough to move.
Mm-hmm. Right. So I guess, speaking of change right now, I'd love to ask the audience, how has hiring during the pandemic changed for you? Because I think not only with speed and steps, the entire recruiting strategy has changed for most of us. So love to hear the audience, and we'll open back up discussion in just about a minute. All right. So in Boston tech fashion, most of us have hugely accelerated our hiring. For us at Optimus, we're aggressively growing, especially in engineering. And we know we need that, domain knowledge and expertise, which is typically at the senior principal level, to help elevate our groups. But as we expected, the pipeline is much more rich at the junior and even mid-level engineer. So at what point do you need to heavily advise on hiring a certain level of candidate? Danny?
Yeah, I think when I think about a certain level of candidate, right, if you get too bottom heavy, right, there's not enough people to lead and direct and help out, right? But at the same time, if you've got a bunch of managers who's doing the actual work, right, I think it's something that you're constantly iterating and looking at. I think you can sort of build a framework by which you can say, hey, we think each manager should have X amount of people, right? And I've been in situations where we'll have a director or a manager who has 20 direct reports, right? I think it's pretty safe to say that many, if not all of those people are not being effectively managed or led or given a path, right? And ultimately, that's how you lose people. And we're talking about hiring aggressively and how challenging it is. What about, taking care of the people that we have that are already here, right? And making sure that they have appropriate leadership and mentorship and also opportunity, right? So I think you sort of are constantly looking at this, constantly iterating on it, but I think you build guardrails, right? Like, I don't think a director should have more than X reports. There's not enough time in the week to give them the support they need while doing their job. And then you're constantly evaluating. I think you're talking to your people regularly. Like, what are some challenges that you're dealing with? What can be something that can help you do your job better? What sort of mentorship and leadership can we give? And sort of making sure that we're keeping that organizational structure as things scale, right? If we need to we're up to 8 directs for a person, maybe we need to hire a new manager. They start building out their team, and it sort of scales out versus, hey, we have a lot of work to do. We're just going to keep hiring under this one person and hope for the best. I think that's not really the best strategy.
Right. Jody?
Yeah, I think, one of the advantages that many people on this call can give is there's something really special and exciting about being first. I've had the pleasure of working with a lot of startup organizations. So if you're comparing apples to apples and, maybe it's a little bit different with options or not options, or location isn't as much a factor, but to be able to say you're going to be one of 5 in this core team we're hiring now together to build is a really big message that I think sometimes we forget about, because somebody who's very comfortable, who's worked at a Raytheon for 20 years may or may not be the right fit. They might have the right resume, but the mindset and sort of what their expectations are. So I think it is just being really honest that we're an entrepreneurial culture. There's going to be wearing many hats. You're not going to have the admin support me, but here's what our plan is, and here's how we want you to help influence that plan. So that's where I see, the clients we work with be successful is that, and on the recruiting and the TA side, there is no benefit to faking people into taking a job anymore. Our friends at Glassdoor will take care of that pretty quickly. So people still sometimes will maybe make the wrong decision, but you need to be able to be, honest. And I think, Danny, you might have said this as well. What's happening now? Plus, is this job going to be available for me in 2 years? Because I think that's what candidates they may not plan to stick around for 2 or 3 years, but they want to know if you've thought about how to keep them there.
Right. Mike, do you have anything to add about kind of pumping the brakes on hiring after going guns blazing, whether it's because of upcoming funding, budgets, or a business change?
Yeah, I think that doing the hiring freeze or pencils down or whatever you'd like to call it is a scary thing for an organization to hear, and so I think trying to think about ways, to Danny's point, thinking about your organizational structure and maybe thinking about your employee to manager ratios, and starting to try to get your ratios in check before adding more people. I think it's also important to be looking internally towards training those individuals. But as you slow down, there's some things that you could do in terms of shifting profiles towards, more complex hires, or thinking more about, I think the overall general vision of that business and kind of where they need to go. Maybe it's slowing the hiring plan down for a period of time to then ramp back up in the back half of the year, for instance. And so you can do that through, a mix of both, full-time staff or contract staff, or pulling in, third parties like Jody's company as well. And so there's a variety of different ways to kind of pump the brakes. But I don't think the screeching halt is ever a good thing for the business to do, because it takes a little while to reprime the pump, if you will, and get the hiring engine and kind of back up and running.
To Mike's point about the slowing down a bit, I think that's sometimes it's a recruiter's or a recruiting leader's favorite thing, because what that little bit of a break allows us to do is really focus on some of the programs that have maybe been lacking, right? Referral programs or management training or interview training, or maybe it's building out your applicant tracking system a bit more to be more competency based, like whatever it is. There's so many programs that sort of get lost and get thrown to the wayside when you're aggressively hiring, right? And you have a ton of roles to recruit for, that a lot of the things that help you scale and be more efficient and take more of an algorithmic approach or take a back seat during those times. And so we get I agree, halt and total stop is never fun, right? But slowing down a bit and sort of giving a little bit more time and resources back to the recruiting team to think a bit more strategically is always a good thing for us.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the slowing down or stopping versus pipelining are two different things. And I think that's really the benefit, is that it gives you a chance to build some relationships without the pressure of trying to close somebody to take a job. It also gives you some insight before you need it. So, if you're going to be adding in a function or doing something, let's say 2022, now's a good time, if you can have some capacity to just get some of that market intelligence, have some conversations. What would it take to get someone like such and such that I spoke to come, or are we thinking that maybe we need a level below because they can be sort of under this position, which we hadn't thought about before. So there's a lot of free knowledge. It's just the time to be able to look at that and look at, what's happening in the market, what types of people are available. Even having conversations. In some cases, you can use someone to have a confidential conversation to say, hey, I'm representing such and such. They're thinking of opening up this type of role. Was that something you would be interested down the road? So with time comes information and insight. And that's a really useful tool to go back to, the hiring manager and founder conversation to say, I know we've all been very excited that we're building it up this way, but if we move over here, I think there's a couple people that we could bring in that are going to help get us to this path in a different way. But that's hard to do when you're under the gun to fill a rec.
Yeah. I'm just going to add one other thing. I think that it's also very scary for most recruiters to hear that you're slowing hiring down. And so the way that you message to your teams is really, really important. I've actually had, somebody leave my team in the past because they got frightened that maybe we weren't going to turn things back on. We did, of course. I ended up hiring the person back. That's a whole nother story. But I just think it's really important, the way you message out to your team.
Right. And not only to your team, but, I was previously an outsourced recruiting extension. I see so much value in how that can be incorporated into your org. So I'd love to hear some other scenarios of where you bring in external recruiting help. Jody, I'd love to start with you.
Sure. I mean, I think, being in New England, outsourced recruiting and, RPO was like a bad word. It was the evil empire that came in and, the nice lady that had been HR got fired. And that was a perception for a long time. I think we were a little behind than in Europe and a couple other markets. But now it's become more of a reality. And I always use the analogy of thinking back to the time where people did their own benefits, and there was a trend to start outsourcing benefits. And again, people were like, oh, that's so important to our employees. I can't imagine using someone outside to do that benefits. But now I don't know anyone who does that by themselves, because there's an expertise and an agility, a flexibility, and cost savings to do that. So I would say outsourcing is important to do if you have a clear picture of why are you doing that. Michael kind of alluded to it. The recruiting market's really tough right now to hire good recruiters. So it might just be, do I want to settle for the recruiters that I can get, or do I actually want to take a portion of the business, have that managed so that those rows are filled with expertise, and then I can turn that on or off. I think when you're looking at employer branding or perception, sometimes it is easier to have somebody who's not within HR or your organization to really dig down to, what is it that's keeping people there and why are people leaving? It's hard for someone to say that to somebody without worrying about some costs to their own equity within the business. But when you do look to outsource, it needs to make sense. Can you commit to a long enough relationship, not just a one-off partnership, so that you really are starting to feel an extension of the team? And do you have an honest conversation of whether this might be a long-term, or, hey, we need this for a year until we build in our own HR infrastructure? And I think that's where I see the success coming, is that people are moving away from needing to do a multi-million 3-year deal where nobody really likes each other by the end. And it's that flexibility of being able to fit and just support where organizations need it without duplicating what they already have.
Mm-hmm. Danny, I'd love to hear from you, especially since you are utilizing Jody's team right now.
Yeah, I think, there's really two situations, and we're kind of in both at the same time. The first of which is we built an amazing recruiting team. We talked about how challenging it is to hire recruiters, and we've got some amazing ones. But what I am seeing is they are incredibly overloaded, right? Way too many recs, way too many phone screens. So I think, TalentWorks, for example, in this case, can provide some breathing room. Part A. Part B is, with how fast we're growing and a lot of unknowns in the future, right? Like, we may need to hire 200 people this year, and maybe we need X number of recruiters to do that. But next year, maybe that number goes down. Maybe it's supposed to, right? So we want to make sure we're not over hiring recruiters, right? So if we're over hiring and then we don't have recs for them, that causes a challenge. So I think TalentWorks is giving us an amazing buffer here, where we're able to fill the roles that we need today. And hey, if we need, to continue this pace, we can hire more recruiters over time and wait until we find the ones we really, really like and have that buffer. In addition, like, they're helping our throughput. Instead of, 3 hires per month per recruiter, with this resource, we're getting 4, maybe 5 per permanent recruiter on our team, right? And I think that's something that's an amazing help to our hiring managers, right? I think more than anything, I see this as an opportunity to leverage, protect my own team, make sure people are happy, make sure they have time to think about recruiting programs, making sure they're not overloaded, without slowing down the business, without slowing down our hiring managers, who are desperately trying to grow very quickly to facilitate the work that's coming in. So TalentWorks, so far, it's very early, but it's gone very, very well. And we're so excited about it. And you can start to see some of my recruiters' calendars start to slowly have a little bit more availability, and bathroom and lunch breaks are becoming much more normal now. And it's sort of what our objective was, which is amazing. And so we're already seeing the results of that a few weeks in, and I'm hoping that partnership continues and long term is very fruitful.
Mm-hmm. So one important thing we haven't dove in on really much is employer branding. So how do you start to tell your story as an employer? Jody, I'd love to start with you.
Sure. I mean, I think everybody has a story. Everybody has an employer brand. It's whether you manage it or not is really what comes down to. And especially during the pandemic, we sort of saw people say, I'm going to wait it out. I'm going to just stop and not worry about, any of those projects for about 5-6 months. But the reality is, everything that you used to have as part of sort of the showy parts of employer brand. We have an amazing office. You can skateboard. We have free food. It was very sort of aesthetic and location based and like fun events. And you look at career sites and websites, and now nobody's doing that. It really peels back the onion. So I think just to start out is, do you know why someone should come work for you? Do you kind of have a sense, and even in that internal conversation of, what are those attributes that are unique? What types of people? And I don't mean that from a diversity type. I mean just personality type, work ethic, partnering, not partnering, who's going to be successful? Every organization needs smart people that can do their job, but the culture of working for one company versus another is very different. And then very quickly try to get that message across, because a good employer brand is going to save, Danny and Michael a lot of time, because it means that somebody is going to be able to look, assess, and decide that's not for me. The job description might be fine, but it seems like they're really focused on values and culture, and that's not my thing. I want to, wear my headphones and not have to talk to anybody. I'd rather work for this type of organization. Mm-hmm. So it's really starting out with conversations, and looking at what data you already have, exit interviews, Glassdoor reviews, anything that you've done as far as engagement surveys, even sort of water cooler conversation. I feel that, the days of needing to take 6 months to build an employer brand for a client are over. There's so much information that we get now quickly. And then really being strategic of, I do feel it's important to have that high level conversation with the founders and the C-suite, and then the people that are there, to see where the gap is. If somebody that, and these are the stakeholders that Danny and Mike deal with, they're saying we need this, this, and this. You then have that conversation in a safe space with the folks that are doing the delivery, and they say, we have lots of that. We need this and this. That's really going to help you drive not only the messaging, but also help with the talent acquisition strategy and where to look.
Mike, anything to add?
Oh yeah. This is a space I spend a lot of time thinking a lot about. At Meter, we pulled together a pseudo employer brand because it'll all change here pretty quickly, and we did it in a matter of weeks. Through some focus groups where we then defined our personas. That then helped us define our hiring attributes in an internal language, and we defined core values along the way, which then kind of flushed out some of the career site, which plug for Next Wave Hire, and that allowed us to get loud. And the thing about getting loud is that it creates a lot of internal band as it relates to sourcing, but it also creates a lot of internal engagement, right? This is an opportunity for the team to crow about the work that we're doing, or the roles that we're hiring for, or celebrate the people at the company. It's a great way for people to feel proud about the work that we're doing.
So we have a highly upvoted question from the audience. So Alina is looking to better understand, what's your favorite and least favorite part about hiring in this candidate-driven market? Danny, would you like to start?
Well, since Elena's on my team, I'm glad we're starting. It's a great question. I think it's a lot more challenging to sort of build that relationship and sort of the inherent, I'll say loyalty is not really the right word, right? I think candidates are sort of less concerned about burning a bridge. I think Jody early on mentioned candidates are still interviewing after they accept. Before, it's a big no-no, right? Especially since I might know everyone in the market that you're interviewing for. And I think it's really hard to build that relationship. I think it's a lot more work on our part. I think we have to do it though. It's the nature of things, the way it is. And so I think we need to be a little bit quicker to respond, a little bit, maybe more touch points, maybe being mindful during somebody's notice period to create sort of strategic messaging, hey, you're 2 weeks out, here's what you can expect in the next 2 weeks. And hey, you're 1 week out, we're so excited, here's what you can expect the next couple of days, and so on and so forth, right? Keeping that connection versus I think, historically recruiters sort of, once the offer letter signed, right, that's on to onboarding, it's on to HR. Now we're sort of maintaining those relationships throughout the first 90 days to make sure that, what we talked about early on has rang true and there's a great relationship. I think another thing is there's tons of competing offers, right? And it's, geo doesn't matter anymore to some extent, right? You've got people in Vermont making New York salaries. So it's a lot to manage. I think ultimately we will catch up. We will be able to sort of stabilize a bit, but that's a challenge. And I think that the last piece is everybody's hiring very aggressively right now. And so not only is it really challenging to find an engineer, it's really challenging to find a recruiter to recruit engineers. And they're almost as valuable, if not more, right? Hiring one engineer is great. Hiring one recruiter who can hire 10 engineers might be more important, right? And so it's an interesting challenge. I actually enjoy it. I think there's a lot more texting with candidates. There's a lot more, extra calls in between meetings. There's a lot more touch points, which I really enjoy. I think what it becomes is sort of an operational challenge of how do you maintain those and not forget anybody and making sure you're doing touch points everywhere. Luckily, we've got an amazing team and a ton of call of actions that we've set up to make sure we're always hitting those touch points. But certainly a lot more thought goes into each individual process than maybe it would have otherwise, which I think is a good thing.
Mm-hmm. Mike or Jody?
I would say there's really never been a better time to be in talent acquisition if you're up for the challenge, because for everything that we've been talking about today, I feel like there is an urgency and a partnership with managers and leaders to understand how important this is. I think that with the challenge comes the ability to really have that conversation to say, if we want to, we don't want to wait and interview 8 people. We've got 3 we really like. I think it's time to move that, let's make that decision and move things along. And I think there's just an agility right now. Look at where we were a year ago. I mean, our business is up 400%. So it's really exciting. It's a wild ride. It's not easy, but if you're going to go into this business, this is fun. Like there's lots of roles, there's lots of candidates, there's lots of discussion, and it's really being able to kind of put your arms around, I think, Danny's point, being a little bit more strategic and realizing you're not just a cog in the wheel. You're not just going to get someone to accept a letter and move on. It's really being able to, I think for many, learning a little bit more about the people strategy and certainly building networks with more candidates than we did before, beyond the walls of where we usually recruit from. So it's a challenging time, but I think a really agile, flexible time and can be something you're going to be proud of in 6 months when you look back of what you've done as a business.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. I agree on everything that's been said. A couple of things. So, some of the things that, I think the big thing for me that I've disliked is that, things have, to Danny's point, have just become a lot more transactional, right? It's the need to add all of the additional touch points in and create selling opportunities, where we may not have had to do, as many of those rounds in previous lives. I also think there's the shift to culture and not just office culture that's occurred. And, for companies that aren't necessarily willing to get behind that and or change their employer branding to kind of align to that, I think they're going to be left behind. On the side that I do like, there's a bunch, right? There's a lot of kind of benefit that's come out of this. Is that I think there's some ease of process, as it pertains to remote hiring, getting people's availability, sneaking in an interview in the middle of the day just became so much easier. 18 months, beginning 18 months ago. And then, from an internal perspective, we have the opportunity to build the diverse teams that we always wanted to build, because, most companies are allowing for remote hiring, or there are remote hiring opportunities virtually in every company. And so there's an opportunity to go out and really, be intentional about the team that we build.
Mm-hmm. So on that note too, and we're of course seeing much more of it, which is extraordinarily positive, but how do you start to empower hiring managers when it comes to diversity recruitment and hiring? So all the way through offer accept.
I'll take the first stab on this one. And I think I'm seeing organizations do things that they've been talking about for a long time, but it's becoming a reality in the last 12, 15 months, which is it's not an ask, it's a requirement to have diversity in your panel and your candidates. I know clients and companies who are basically saying we're going to be very upfront and say this is part of your performance metrics and bonus plans for managers. So that's been talked about on sort of the HR side for a very long time. So I think that is giving the TA teams a little bit more leverage to say, I know that this person, it doesn't look exactly like what you envisioned, whether it's degrees or programs or location or ethnic diversity or whatever it might be, but they're 7.5 of the 9, and they're going to be what we need to have some diversity of thought in this team. So I think that we are starting to see a more willingness for people to step away from, it has to be everyone who went to my alma mater. It has to be everyone who worked at this place before, because there just aren't enough of those people to fill the roles just in Boston.
Yeah, I think to Jody's point, a lot of it starts at the top, right? It's the executive, the CEO needs to really start, kind of set the direction, especially in a startup, as it pertains to things like intentionality, speed, the goals behind diversity hiring, and that can all then be supported through interview training, right, that we talked about earlier, and then also trying to align what Danny talked about into more of a laser competency focus.
Yeah, that's literally what I was going to say next, right? It's one of the biggest challenges with this is unconscious bias. I mean, there's certainly conscious bias, but really unconscious is really challenging because you don't know you're doing it, right? And so I think if you create a process by which, again, it's quantifiable, right? There's like a right, you either know the answer or you don't, right? It's a lot harder to have that unconscious bias. Did they answer the question right? Yes. Great. We should hire them. Did they get it wrong? No, we shouldn't. It's not that I think or I feel, which is where that unconscious bias sort of creeps in. And certainly providing training around all that is really, really important. But, you know, if you can mitigate the opportunities to have it as much as possible, I think that helps as well.
Good. So thinking of, to your points of, you know, tenure and bringing the right talent in, you know, we're making quicker decisions. How do you start to evaluate if you are bringing in the right talent once they're in? Mike, do you want to start?
Sure. I think there's a few different ways to, you know, evaluate, right? So there's, alignment through the performance management program, right? And so hopefully the same core values or competencies that were used during the hiring process get rolled forward into, you know, what's being measured for in that particular role, and whether that's done on the good old Big Bang annual approach or, you know, what's more standard these days. I think a lot of companies have moved more towards quarterly or trimester approach to ensure that those conversations are happening, I think is a really important thing. I also think that, you know, if there's opportunities to do pre-hire assessment during the interview phase, there's a way to kind of pull that forward and use that in, you know, ways to for managers to coach their employees, you know, whether it's determining a communication style or a various selling profile, you know, if you're using PI, for instance. You know, there's ways for managers to take that data and coach their people and also measure, you know, performance.
Mm-hmm. Danny, Jody?
Yeah, I think the performance review cycle is really important, right? And it's not necessarily a talent acquisition thing, but I think there needs to be a partnership there, right? Like we talked about going back and looking at scorecards, right? Like, hey, this person really evaluated super highly in the interview process on this skill. Well, let's look at their semi-annual review. Well, during their review, it's sort of they've scored really low in that area, right? Like maybe we're not evaluating right, or maybe we're not asking the right questions. And how do we change and how do we adjust? And I think, you know, it's you're not going to get it right the first time, but I think as long as you're constantly iterating on it and thinking about how can we be better in everything that we do, right? You're gonna pick your head up a year later, 2 years later, and be like, wow, we're so much further than we were when we started. I think that's really important.
Yeah, I think these guys covered that pretty well.
Agree. So another question coming from our audience. So as we had talked about, the people and talent hire, we're seeing it, and I'm seeing it even within this group, is coming much earlier on in an organization. So when do you recommend bringing in the first people or talent hire?
I can go first. I'm biased, right? I'm always going to say recruiting, but I think it sort of depends on the situation, right? Like if you need to hire 50 people ASAP, right? You probably need to bring in a recruiting hire. If you've got, you know, an established team, you're doing a little bit of hiring, but a lot of the infrastructure that you need for people isn't there, right? You don't have review cycle, you don't have interview training, you don't have you know, appropriate benefits that are where your company is, right? I think it sort of shifts to a more like people ops focus. It sort of depends on the company and the situation. But again, my bias is always towards hiring someone in recruiting, but I'm biased.
Yeah, I'm going to say I'm pretty biased against this one too. I'd say the earlier the better. And, you know, if you can find, you know, unicorn types, people that can kind of balance between talent acquisition and then dabble in, you know, other parts of the people ops business, you can get away with it for a bit of time, and, you know, allow that person to kind of build out their skill set and experiences on the people ops side as well. Not saying that it's good to have a side hustle, but you know, when in Rome, right?
I think we're seeing a lot of movement for those roles too. So I think you want to bring in that person when there's enough juicy information, you know, good stuff for them to do, because like everyone was talking about, you know, it's very easy to get swept away if you don't feel like you're making an impact and have enough, you know, whether it's budget or support or, you know, management with the team to be not on an island trying to build out these programs by yourself. So that would be my answer to that is the organization ready to understand this is an important factor that we need to work in to grow and scale? Mm-hmm. And if they're not ready and they just tend to hire people, that may not be the right time to bring that person in yet.
I think there's also like a cost benefit analysis that needs to be done in order to determine like when you should bring in the person and how much impact that person is going to have on the organization, right? When a company is much smaller, it's harder to have more impact at the grant. It's easy to have impact, right? But it's harder to have that like exponential, excuse me, that's the word I'm looking for, impact that maybe could be seen on more of the product side.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, earlier is definitely better. I think once you start to form habits, a lot harder to break them. Change management becomes more challenging. It takes longer. You set up good precedents day one or early on. It's going to help you scale and avoid challenges later for sure.
Right. So Jody, you talked about comp, a little bit of benefits and budgets, and at the end of the day, folks aren't volunteering to work at their new job. So this question does come from the audience when you are trying to juggle the high competitive market rates, but also maintaining internal equity in your team. So how do you remain attractive to new hires when you, at the end of the day, have to deal with internal budgets and keeping equity within the team?
I mean, I think it's as much transparency as you can have, and people are going to self-select in or out, and good employees may leave and bad employees may leave. So it really comes down to, when you were asking the question a little bit earlier about how do you know you've successfully hired the right person? I would say, did you hire the right person for that role at that time? Because a year from now, that right person for that role might be slightly different because the role might need to be different and the person might need to be slightly different. And I think that the success I'm seeing now is, and we've gone through this ourselves as an organization, is good people that were good at an early part of your business as you grow and scale may be better served in a different role or in a different place. And so I think it is being willing to really take the time as a leadership team to like stop and look and evaluate. I think that's one of the benefits of the pandemic is that, in addition to be able to squeeze an interview at midday, people aren't traveling, they're not back to back in conference rooms. So I find that we've had more time as a leadership team to talk about some of those things that would be very hard to schedule in the ebb and flow. So mm-hmm. I think it is really keeping yourself on notice to be looking at not just what's coming up, but what's behind you, so that you might have somebody who's really ripe for the movement internally. So that's where I think it's just hard to do that when you're busy and you're feeling understaffed and there's a lot of competition. But putting in a little bit of time to do that, I think, makes employees feel that they're valued. I know organizations that actually have dedicated support when you get a little bit bigger to have somebody who does that quick response for roles that, maybe they're not ready for that next role, but they don't just get ignored by the talent acquisition team that's too busy chasing open roles and new candidates. There's some infrastructure in there that people feel like, okay, thanks for that answer, that I need to work on this, or that maybe there's something else I can do as a lateral project. So it's not easy to do, but I think it's important from a culture standpoint and especially to be able to generate referrals, which we haven't talked about, which is another great way to grow and scale. But people need to feel good about where they're working before they tell their friends to come.
Mm-hmm. Mike, Danny, anything with regards to maintaining equity within the team when you're talking about these competitive market rates?
I think, one of the things that, I've done in the past. So for instance, when I was at Shift, this is pretty progressive, I would say, is we shared bonus and equity structures and had an aligned structure that we shared with the entire company. We also shared things like total percentage of increase. We shared some additional data that I think helped to alleviate some of the concern there in terms of kind of equitable practice. But there's other things that are easy enough to just drop into your kind of your annual standard processes, whether it's a quarterly review of compensation to ensure that people are feeling that that's equitable across the team. I think allowing an organization to do upward feedback so that there's an opportunity to measure managers as well, and have employees be heard on how their managers are doing, create some equality as well. So I think there's a lot of different ways. And to Jody's point around kind of internal mobility and building programs that allow employees to grow within the organization or move laterally or sometimes backwards, depending on if it's a career start, I think is a great opportunity for people to stay within the walls, create the engagement, and grow with a company that's invested in them.
Mm-hmm. So Jody, to your point, your referral program is hugely important when you are scaling. So how does your referral program impact your growth, and does it change over time with your growth?
So I think, I'm a big fan of doing pulse referral, like advertising programs, because I think we all hope that everybody's referring. And certainly the number one rule is, the best people to talk to about it are your new hires, because they miss their friends that they used to like. And if you can give them some financial advantage to give you a name, and they haven't experienced any of the negativity of really working yet. So it's a good audience to target. But referrals, what you want to do is make sure that you're keeping open the communication. So I really like to do prizes and have sort of a timed event. Like we're getting into this good time of year, like pre-holidays, where you can be very specific, build some excitement, build a leaderboard. And I think sometimes employees are afraid to refer if their candidate's not given the role. And so doing something that's prize-based, and whether we hire your person or not, you're entered to win into something fun and like join in the fun. So I do feel like you want to make sure that you're not adding more pain and suffering to your TA team to go through, but it might be very role specific. There might be a 6-week window that you can kind of do a bit of a push. And I do feel like good organizations have high referrals. It's a great, efficient way to not be paying outsource fees, as well as draining as much time. What Danny and Mike are talking about, the rounds and rounds of conversation, it helps a little bit if you've got someone on the inside to help you sort of move that candidate along to join. So I do think it's something to look at. I think that people are mindful that from a diversity standpoint, sometimes, the perception is that would get in the way, and you're starting to get more like for like. So I think it is just being honest with the ground rules of saying, we're looking for people from different locations, different backgrounds, and that if you need to explain to, an employee why someone that they thought could do the job didn't get the job, I think it's having that open conversation that we're really looking to bring in, not the same all the time. So,
Danny, Mike, anything to add?
Yeah, I think being creative with your referral programs is always good. I remember at DraftKings, we did this thing where depending on which position you referred, you got sort of a lottery ticket. It's very DraftKings-esque. And at the end of the year, we got this big Wheel of Fortune wheel and spun it. And depending on how many tickets you have, how many slots you had, and the winner got their choice of it was a BMW 3 Series, a A3, and $40,000 in cash, right? Whatever it was, but it was sort of this like major prize, which seemed like a lot to make a referral. But when you actually broke down the metrics, we made quite a few referral hires because everyone was so excited. And it actually broke out to be generally cheaper. And we had smaller prizes for those that didn't win, but generally cheaper than giving, let's say, $5,000 a referral or whatever you see, which is common. So we got more referrals, more hires, more excitement, more engagement, and also save the company money, right? There's ways that you can be really creative to help drum up as many referrals as you can and get people excited about it.
Mm-hmm. So we just have about 60 seconds left together. Any other insightful tidbits or any words of advice for hiring and scaling in a hypergrowth mode right now?
I think just, take each day and be flexible in your thinking, doing things the way you used to do it. I see a few questions have come up around like how many people are applying. I would just go with the assumption that you're going to need to be proactive in your hiring. And there's lots of different ways to do that we've talked about. But I think it's not easy, but it's not impossible either. You just need to have some smart people that are willing to work with you to get it done.
Yeah, I think one of the big things is an immense amount of pressure on us recruiters to hire a ton of people, right? I think if you want to be a good recruiter, start pulling in everyone. If you want to be a great recruiter, be patient, hire the right people. Maybe you have to take 2 or 3 weeks longer to make a hire, but it's much better than having to backfill it in 3 to 6 months when it doesn't work out. So be patient, make sure you're evaluating people appropriately, make sure you're making the right hires, even though it might take a week, 2 weeks longer. Obviously, you don't want to take months longer, right? But being patient and making the right hires is critical.
Yep, I have, I think, 2 things. One is you have to employ the, as in Game of Thrones talk here, the many-faced man, the many-face strategy. Right now, you have to employ so many different strategies in order to get the job done. I think that's one thing. 2, candidate experience matters so much. You have to employ a great experience for people to go through. And if you're questioning whether or not it's a great experience, put yourself through it and see how it feels.
Awesome. Justin, I think the tables are over to you now.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie. Coming back on camera, watching the time when it was running short, it was the hardest thing I've ever had to do to cut this conversation. There was some serious momentum. Absolutely incredible, guys. Thank you, Danny, Jody, Mike, Emily, for moderating, and for the guests and the attendees here. Serious engagement, some really, really amazing questions. So huge thanks to everybody. Thanks again for TalentWorks for sponsoring this one. We're going to be going into break on this one, so it's not like you're missing another session. But for the afternoon sessions, again, just pop onto the agenda tab at the top of the screen. That's going to show you all the things that are going on and which sessions you might want to catch. Hopefully we'll see you. If we don't, enjoy the rest of the week. And thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.